Good evening. Things can only get worse. Yes, that was Keir Starmer's speech today. Gosh, we're a long way away, aren't we, from the heady optimism of the early days of the Blair government. Now, it's fair to say, of course, we're living under different circumstances, but it was a pretty grim speech. Let's begin with Law and Order and his analysis of what led to the riots.
But these riots didn't happen in a vacuum. They exposed the state of our country, revealed a deeply unhealthy society, the cracks in our foundations laid bare, weakened by a decade of division and decline, infected by a spiral of populism which fed off cycles of failure of the last government. Every time they faced a difficult problem, they failed to be honest. They offered the snake oil of populism.
I've never heard more nonsense in the whole of my life. The last Conservative government was the least populist government I think I've ever seen in the whole of my life. But he's perfectly clear that the reason for the riots is your fault. It's all your fault. It is society's fault. Nothing to do with government policy whatsoever. But moving on, this is the man who is going to be tough on crime. Let's hear him.
Now they're learning that crime has consequences, that I won't tolerate a breakdown in law and order under any circumstances.
Really? Is that right? Is that why 147,000 people in the last year have been given community resolutions, which means nothing will appear on their police records? That includes offences such as minor sex crimes, violence and possession of weapons such as knives. Oh, and by the way, if you want to go shoplifting, that's absolutely fine. Unless you nick 200 quid's worth, we won't even bother to have a look. And whilst he's getting tough on violent disorder on our streets, well, Prime Minister, what about the 61 police officers that were assaulted over the weekend at the Notting Hill Carnival? That's nothing to say of many of the other things that went wrong during that so-called festival. And I just wonder, I want you to answer this question for me. Is this two-tier policing from two-tier Keir? Email me, farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined in the studio by Sir John Webber tonight. I'm joined also by Lloyd Russell-Moyle. They'll be with me right throughout the show. But I'm going to begin with former Scotland Yard detective Mike Neville. Mike, Notting Hill is every single year, it's contentious. But there were more stabbings this year than last year, more arrests this year than last year, more assaults on police officers this year than last year, more sexual offences committed this year than last year. It's barely been in the news.
You know, it's the ultimate two-tier policing, and I said that in the press this weekend. What you have all the time, if you at Notting Hill, when I was serving, when officers I know are still serving, they'll see people openly smoking drugs, they'll see people abusing the police, blowing smoke in their face, twerking with female officers to the point of sexual assault, and it's accepted. To get arrested at Notting Hill takes some effort. So when they said there's been 330 arrests, they took a real effort to do that, because if you applied the same standards to football fans who are walking to the ground, if they started twerking with female officers, openly smoking drugs and abusing officers, they would be swiftly arrested. And what we see here is that people committing very violent crimes, a near murder we've got here, stabbings, how many of those people will be in court within 24 hours having some kind of show trial that we saw on the news here? We had a woman sentenced to 15 months for putting a stupid and vile Facebook post up about burning down a mosque. She had no ability to burn down the mosque and no intention. She just put this stupid, vile post up.
I mean, still not a good thing to do.
It's a wicked and evil thing to do. But she is the sort of person who should have some community resolution. She should perhaps meet with the local imam, discuss what she's done, realise that he's not a bad chap.
So why is this happening?
Because the left don't like prison unless they don't like the people they're putting in there. So everybody's a victim, according to the left, apart from, say, the white working class, who you could stereotype as right-wing thugs.
Why, if you're being very clear that you believe there is two-tier policing. Every senior police officer at the moment in this country will disagree with you. What is at the root of the problem?
The root of the problem, when I started the Met, half the senior officers were ex-military guys like myself, and there was a balance between them and the academics. Nearly every senior police officer now is a clone. They're from a university background, they believe in left liberal values, most of them think that stop and search is racist, they're not really interested in crime. Their focus is producing a police force which is diverse and whatever else. And I've always said this, no one has ever said to me, I didn't like the sex or colour of the officer who came to help me. What they say is I got a terrible service, my burglary wasn't investigated, the person who assaulted my wife wasn't arrested. No one cares about this wokery apart from this clique which is in charge of this country. The average person, gay or straight, black or white, just wants good service from the police and everywhere else, but they're not getting it because there's an obsession with these things, with wokery.
Mike, stick with me. Lloyd, it did seem very odd that the Prime Minister, I'm going to crack down, and actually, we want the Prime Minister to crack down on violence on our streets. We genuinely do, whoever commits it. But to not even mention Notting Hill, it's a bit of an omission, isn't it?
Well, I think that it's totally wrong to put Notting Hill and riots in the same breath.
Do you?
It's totally wrong because it shows a real lack of understanding of the law, I'm afraid, on Mike and your part. Riots, no matter who they were, when I was in Bradford and we had race riots, in Tottenham when we had the 2011 riots, they were, and always have been, seen as one of the worst offences that you can do against the state. Worse than murder to some extent, in terms of proportionality of the crime. Because murder or an individual offence is me offending someone else. Rioting is the whole of society ignoring, or in that moment, ignoring and destroying the rule of law and the rule of how society operates. And so society itself always has punished those people very harshly.
61...
Those Asian men in
police
Bradford
officers
got huge sentences that were totally disproportionate. The same in Manchester. You remember those people in the 11 riots where the people were being locked up for months for taking an ice cream. It has always been the case. And that's not two-tier policing. That's a societal pact that we've made that says rioters always get it more. Now, I do think there is a problem with Notting Hill.
If 61 police officers are assaulted, that's not very far away from being a riot.
Well, this is the first time.
Come on.
This is the first year that we have the assault on police officers as a specific crime, so it is recorded now differently, and so we have to check to see whether is there always a problem at this place, at Notting Hill, and at other large events, and we know other large events also cause disobedience, and they need to be stamped down. But what Keir was talking about was the riots, which I don't think is the same as disturbances at Notting Hill.
I think disobedience is underplaying what happened over the weekend. John, two quite strong opinions there, but there's a problem. There is a growing perception in the country of two-tier policing. That's my belief.
There is that worry, and I think the Prime Minister has not helped with his very ill-judged speech today, because he's, as you said, blamed the whole of society. He said, we're all guilty of this, and he says we now live in a very divided society. Well, there's nothing wrong with divisions of opinion in a democratic society if they're expressed sensibly, and if they're sorted out by the ballot box and by votes and arguments. What we don't want is violence. Violence is a crime, and the Prime Minister has sometimes spoken and said it's a crime, so he's now got to prove that he and the various police forces are fully enforcing the law in a totally fair way, whoever is guilty of the violent crime. And I think you're right to say it's quite difficult drawing these distinctions that this is definitely a riot and this is just people behaving badly. What we surely want is to deal with all crimes of violence as serious crimes. And we want a Prime Minister who doesn't blame the whole of society or think that Britain is a basket case, but a Prime Minister who's proud of our country and understands that most of us, most of the time, live good lives and are well disposed towards our neighbours.
David Cameron and Nick Clegg in 2011 say about the riots there. They said there was something wrong with society, that it got to this stage, that initiated, of course, by the murder of an innocent black man, but, kind of all spiralled out. They blamed, and they said that what we needed to do was look at how society, not individuals, and not, of course, political parties, needed to react to this.
Well, were wrong as well then, weren't they?
Well, I think they were probably right. And what they did do is they initiated an inquiry, and I think we probably should see something similar like that on
Mike, Lloyd draws a distinction between disobedience at Notting Hill and rioting.
Right, OK. So let's look at apples and apples then. Let's look at the police reaction at Hares Hill, where they simply withdrew, allowed that community to burn buses. They just left people who, no doubt in their houses, feared for their lives. They were left to do that. Also, so that's one area of rioting which was completely different. But it's also the reaction to it. So in the past, when we've had things like the Brixton riots, now you can argue for the rights and wrongs, was there some real grievances around this? What would happen is, yes, there's been a riot, people are punished, and then there's an inquiry to say, why did this happen? Because then we can sort things out. With the rioting that took place, now you can argue, was it over Southport? Was it more general about immigration? Was there other causes? People not work? Most of the towns like Bolton, where I'm from, they're very poor areas and there's less jobs there. Is there underlying causes? But all you got from the Prime Minister is these are right-wing thugs, we won't do that's like you're going to be locked up. There was no discussion at all. So when you talk about two-tier policing, it's not two-tier policing as such. It is two-tier government where they're setting these agendas where people who are working class, white, concerns they've got are just dismissed, and if they do riot, they're just dismissed as thugs.
If Mike is right in his analysis, then those divisions, that bad feeling that led to the riots is going to get worse, not better.
Well, again...
We hope not, but...
We hope not. In 2011, it was also... People blamed the EDL whipping it all up, etc. as well, if you remember. The inquiry was launched a number of months after the rioting. It was deliberately launched after the bulk of the sentencing was completed. And then it took 3 years to go through, or 2.5 years to go through the mill. Now, I think it's probably too early for the Prime Minister to, at this moment, say, we need to do an inquiry because they're doing the sentencing. And what you want is the quick overnight courts, which is what we've had in previous riots, to get that over and done with. I do think there is a problem with law and order more broadly in this country, that people genuinely feel that when they call the police, they won't get called out, or they won't come, and more importantly, that there is a lack of community policing. When people stole from the local co-op previously, and they were known figures, the community police support officer was able to react. We've seen huge cuts in those numbers of people. And it's not that you need detectives on the ground, but you need people who know the evidence on the ground, who can work with people.
Gentlemen, thank you. Something is going very wrong. I'll finish this segment by just repeating that more than 147,000 people accused of offences, including sex crimes, violence and weapons possession, were given community resolutions in the year to March. There is societal breakdown. Of that there is no question whatsoever.